Have you ever heard of cultured meat? Now, I like to be cultured sometimes. I know I'm from the South, not the most cultured person in the world, but cultured meat sounds, I sound okay with meats. The cultured meat is really just lab grown meat. And what does that mean? And this, kind of looks, it looks like chicken. Chicken satay. Who doesn't like that? Mm-mm. Right now, FDA approved chicken, cultured chicken, is not only for sale, but right now is being offered at certain restaurants in California. Just buyer beware. There is a push, and I find it interesting as a scientist, I do find it quite interesting, in taking cells of plants, and that's kind of interesting. You can take a cell of a plant, separate it from all of its known kind of attachments, bioengineer these little cells so they no longer stick to each other and they can be grown in a liquid hydroponic culture. They're not genetically engineered. This is all kind of natural selection type stuff, and the way they do it, the cells just naturally respond in this way. And so that is pretty cool. It is a way to harvest phytophenols from plant structures so you don't have to eat a million grapes, for example, to get resveratrol. You can just consume a small amount of dehydrated grape cells that are super high in resveratrol because they're grown in this liquid hydroponic medium. There's really no chemistry to that. Those cells never see any chemistry. And what you get is an extremely high quality, high potency supplement. Well, apply that to meat. This company in California starts with an egg, basically. They find stem cells in the yolk of the egg and get it to naturally transform into muscle cells. And then they grow that in tissue culture. And they don't grow it hydroponically like you would the plants in water. They grow it sort of on a solid medium culture. The deep dive I went on was slab flesh. Now, that does not sound nice. I'm not a fan of slab flesh. But I guess if you didn't know what you were looking at, and you just sort of saw a petri dish and like what looked like a chicken breast grown on it, you would think slab flesh might be appropriate. And so this is passed muster from the FDA, and so it's right. So U.S. Department of Agriculture is the cell cultured meat is what they're calling it. So that will have to go on the label. They say there are two companies that make it, Good Meat and Upside Foods. And so this is animal meat that's grown in cellular culture. The real question would have to be, do they have to add any hormones or nutrients to get this meat to do that? Do they have to transform the cells in any particular way to make them quote unquote immortal? Sometimes you have to, for tissue culture, immortalize the cells so they will continue to grow and not die. Of course, these are stem cell based. And if they're continuously stimulated, perhaps you can do that without that immortalization. Why do I say that? Because you would certainly hate to consume something that is effectively a malignancy. So tissue culture cells that have been immortalized effectively are cancer cells. You wouldn't want to consume that. Because it seems to me you could spark a few intestinal malignancies this way. I don't know. I don't know that's even been studied, to be honest with you. They make it sound like, as I read through this little article, right, stem cells from a fertilized chicken egg. And then they just create more cells. That's my question. Like, what is that step? And then they freeze the best cell lines for future use. So that is civilian words for that sounds innocent enough, unless they turn those cells into perpetually reproducing. You would hate to do that because what if you had an ulcer in your stomach? You consume this cell that's looking for a nice raw slab, so to speak, to rest on, and then it becomes part of you. I don't know that that's possible, but that's a question one should probably ask before you start buying the cultured meat. And while I do like to be cultured, I certainly would like to see any kind of long-term health studies on that before we just go FDA approving it. And just on a political note, I do find it interesting that this process went online right about the time we culled about 100 million chickens, worried about the avian flu. So I'm not saying they're related. I'm just saying that's interesting. So watch the labels on your chicken and chicken with a bone, I think is what the answer is. You need to buy chicken with your bone. Okay? That's the response.